And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 10. I'll just insert a little cheering sound effect here because we've made it to 10 episodes. How amazing is that? To all you new listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a freelance photographer from Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. On today's episode, I want to talk about the things that hold us back and stop us from starting the things that we want to do. I myself, like everybody else out there, have fears and insecurities. I try not to let them hold me back, but occasionally they do stand in my way for a while. I want to take this chance today to address one of the biggest barriers of not only my creative journey, but arguably my whole life. This is something that I deal with every single day and that makes the most simple of tasks super challenging. And you know what? Most people probably wouldn't even know what it is. I just want to put a little disclaimer in here and say that this episode is not for sympathy and not for clout, and it definitely isn't to make anyone feel bad. Since I started this podcast, I knew that I wanted to make this as episode number 10 if I even got that far. This is just my way of inspiring other people and showing you that if I can do it, then you can too. Plus, spreading a little awareness and never hurt anyone either. And so without further ado, I'm going to skip the week in my life for now and jump straight into today's topic. So if you didn't know what I was alluding to before, it's the fact that I have a stutter or a speech impediment, if some of you would like to think of it that way. It's something that I have had for all of my life as far as I'm aware. I'm sure that other people could clarify that for me, but it's something that I've been having to deal with ever since I was a child. As you may or not know, most children are actually born with some type of speech impediment, but normally grow out of them in the early years of their life. However, I've had mine the whole way through my life, and it has actually been something that has impacted me for better or worse. I'm not sure how you would describe that, but I just wanted to speak about that today, and I wanted to touch on a few of the things that it has brought to my attention, I think, in the way of things that do hold us back in starting journeys. And this, obviously, for me, has been something that I've been dealing with for quite a few years now, and something that I've had to come to terms with, but it's also taught me a lot about things that hold other people back, and it's shown me a lot, shown me to have sympathy, I guess, for other people and the things that they are dealing with and things that we don't always know that other people are dealing with because it isn't always as self-evident. And so if you didn't realize before this podcast that I did have a stutter, probably don't feel bad about that, because it just comes down to the fact that I'm an okay editor, and I actually remove all of that out of each week's episode. So if I do actually stutter on any words through the podcast, I remove those, and that's probably part of the reason why it takes me about 5 hours to edit an episode of this podcast, because I do spend a lot of time chopping out a lot of words and a lot of sentences and having to go back, and I'll often find myself halfway through a sentence and having to stop and chop words in half, and then entering a new word in over the top of another word to try and make a sentence actually sound reasonable, I guess, in a way, and to try and make you guys feel as if it's actually one coherent sentence or structure. But today's episode, I wanted to just leave it exactly how it is without editing out anything, really. I'm not going to take out anything unless I have to stop and have a pause and then restart again. I'm not going to leave you with 10 minutes of silence. But apart from that, I'm going to try and leave in as much as I possibly can, because I think that is as authentic as I can be in trying to drive home the point that I'm talking about today. It's also a good practice, I think, moving forward, because I've been struggling a lot with the amount of time that it's been taking me to edit these episodes. And so anything that I can do to have to minimize the editing time, I think is a good thing. And so I think I'm really gonna see a difference in this week's episode, having not editing it at all, I guess. So that will be something good, but hopefully you guys will actually gain a little bit from that, and I will gain something from it as well. Another reason that you may not have noticed is that some scenarios are harder than others. So in this sense, I'm just in a room by myself, speaking to a microphone. And to be honest, one of the biggest things that provokes or exacerbates, I guess, the severity of my speaking is anxiety and the nervousness around actual speech itself. So when I'm just in a room like this by myself, I do actually find it quite easy to have conversations like this. Obviously, it's a very strange thing to do, to just sit here and talk directly into a microphone, but I am someone who does talk to themselves quite a bit. So I've said that before, and I've had to fall back on that a bit, I guess, in that being one of the reasons why that I feel so comfortable in recording these episodes, is because I feel like it's something I do most days anyway. It is very hard to be able to maintain a conversation like this for an hour, but that is where other things come into place, and that is where I have to be super structured on the things I am going to talk about, because I can find myself starting to ramble on and move on into tangents, I guess, and starting to speak about things that aren't really relevant to the topic at hand. But those are just some of the reasons why, and some of the other situations where, if you have ever had a conversation with me in real life, you would know that things and situations can often be a lot harder than this. And so that is where other times that you would actually realize is probably, if I was to ever meet you in real life, is that there would be a fair few amount of nerves involved in that situation. And so that would increase the severity, I guess, in how much you would actually notice my stuttering. And so that is something that a lot of people, I think, are taken aback by if they've never met me in person before, because they would assume, as most people would listening to this podcast, that there isn't anything wrong with my speaking. Of course, anyone, I think, recording a podcast or any sort of audio medium, or whether that be a podcast or recording some sort of video on YouTube or something like that, would have some sort of nerves associated with that. And so the speech probably isn't going to be great first up, and there's going to have to be a few different takes in there to get that right. But for me, it's actually I actually find this quite easy in a way, and the fact that I can sit here and just speak, and there's not actually a lot of things that I have to repeat or have to go back over and have to make sure that they actually sound okay. So when it comes to actually speaking to me in real life, it's not as easy as this. It's not as we're not sitting down having a conversation that I'm completely I don't completely know what I'm going to be talking about. So I don't have that chance to prepare what I'm going to be saying and the direction that I want to be having it in. Obviously, this isn't anything that could ever emulate a conversation, because I am just having a conversation with myself, really. So I am always prepared for the questions that I'm going to be asking myself in my own head, I guess. So in that way, there is that variability in that. And so, yeah, so anyone who has ever met me in real life would know that, and I'm sure that they would be surprised by the fact that I am able to record this podcast, and the fact that it is as effortless, I guess, as it is. Plus, as I said, there are a lot of different techniques that I have in place that I've been working on quite a bit over the years, and so those things sort of come to the front when I'm recording a thing like this. It can be quite challenging to try and practice techniques to try and improve speaking. It seems almost strange to the majority of people to have to think about that, and this is why I said at the start I take a lot of empathy in hearing other people's stories, because I can sort of relate to the things that they are having to go through. Because for me, having to practice something that should come almost second nature to people in their everyday life seems strange. Like, you wouldn't practice waking up and have to practice how to breathe, because that is something that should come automatically. So for me, having to practice ways of speaking and ways of actually trying to get words out of my mouth, because sometimes it can come to a point where I'm not even able to speak, to the point where I'm so blocked up in the throat and in the mouth that there are just aren't any words at all. So having those situations and having to constantly think about how I can avoid that and how I can try to get around that can be quite hard, but it is situations like this where those things come to the front and I'm constantly having to think about it. It's one of the reasons why recording this podcast is so draining for me. I find that afterwards I just can't have a conversation with anyone else for another quite a while, because this hour that I spend recording this podcast can actually be quite draining on me, and that is even more so the case when having a conversation with anyone just in everyday life, because there's obviously more variables at play there in things that aren't in my control, I guess. So I haven't got the time to play with them and sort of work things around in my own way. So one of the things that I do when recording this podcast is, as I said, I try to be quite scripted, but not too scripted. So it was one of my biggest goals from the start, obviously, to not script this podcast, because I didn't want it to be something that would come across just as if I was reading it off a page. And so I'm glad that I haven't got to that point where it's had to be scripted, but I obviously do make a lot of notes about each episode, and I am very thorough with those notes in having enough things to talk about, because I never want to get to a point where I'm just rambling on and not really saying anything. So making sure that I have things to talk about, and then I'm reminding myself to move on to the next thing, and that has really helped me in being able to give myself a chance to sort of to know what I'm talking about, but not be too scripted to the point that I can't change the words in things that I'm trying to say. So you may often notice me be working through a sentence and then all of a sudden change to something else, and that is part of the reason, because I can feel something or a word that is about to a word that I'm about to say is going to be hard to say for me, so then I'll quickly change it to something else. And so it may not always make sense in that context, but for me, it's more important to get the point across than to have the whole sentence be coherent in a way, I guess. But I feel like the words that I change it with aren't always the worst thing and the worst substitute. So not being too scripted allows me to just change the words and change into a different direction and then come back to something else a bit later on if I feel that. I've also, over the process of recording this podcast, have realized things that I do in my own speech that other people probably have noticed and that I haven't ever noticed before, because obviously I don't hear myself speak a lot and I don't pay much attention to the way that I speak as much as I have been over the past 10 weeks, having to edit every single one of these podcast episodes and having to sit down and actually hear myself back. And so I've been noticing a lot that I do roll over all of my full stops in sentences. I'm not someone that ends speaking at the end of a sentence, just like that. And so that is very strange for me to actually stop at the end of a sentence. I feel like sometimes it's just easier for me to just roll on through a full stop, because one of the hardest things when speaking for me, I find, is that starting a new sentence or starting a new word after taking a break to have a breath is one of the hardest things. So I try not to have as many breaths at the end of a sentence, because I already know what I'm going to say to complete the sentence. So then that's an easier spot to take a breath right in the middle of a sentence, as opposed to at the end. And you'll often notice me now, probably, now that I've said that, you'll notice me taking breaks right in the middle of sentences, which really seems like a strange spot to take a break, considering that's what the idea of a sentence is to have a break at the end of sentences. But I've noticed just for me that it's easier to have a break in the middle of sentences. And if anyone else finds that hard to hear, well, I'm sorry about that, but I don't think it impacts that much. And I think that if that is a way that I can try to actually have a complete sentence, I think that's okay. And so that has just been one of the interesting things, I guess, that I have picked up on over the course of things, as well as multiple other different things, that words that I often say over and over again, and things that I just throw in there that don't really make a lot of sense all the time. I sort of say words that don't really mean anything. And I'm sure everyone else has those when they're speaking, but I've had the chance now to really pick up on those. And so I'm not saying them as much, I guess. And I think that, has really helped in being able to understand where my strengths and where my weaknesses lie. And so being able to use those in my advantage for the next time that I record is super important. One of the last things that I do, and I'm not sure if anyone else has noticed it, I'm not sure if people actively realize, you will have to let me know if you do actually notice it, and this probably only applies to people who've had a conversation with me before, is that I tend to speak with the slightest of accents, I guess, in that I guess anyone does when they are speaking, and you'll notice that especially when people are reading, you'll notice that people speak with a slightly different accent to how they would speak with just in general conversation. And so for me, I noticed that I do speak with a slight accent, and because it actually gives me something else to concentrate on. So speaking in a different way than I would speak in everyday speech gives me something else to focus on, so that I'm not concentrating on the words all the time. So if I'm trying super hard to stick within an accent or stick to a style of speaking, it's very easy for me then to just speak my thoughts, I guess, because it's not a situation where I can overthink about the words that I'm going to have to say, because I'm already thinking about how I'm going to pronounce the words. So I'm not then concerned about how I am going to say the words or how I'm going to formulate a sentence, because that is something that then does come fairly easily and does come automatically, because I'm too busy thinking about other things. So I would be interested to actually hear from anyone if they do actually think I'm speaking with an accent, or do think that I do sound a bit different on here. Obviously, that has something to do with the editing of the podcast, in that it's meant to sound like I'm almost on the radio, I guess, in that there isn't a lot of high end in my voice. I've sort of taken out a lot of the midsection. I've sort of taken out a lot of the midsection as well, and boosted up the lower end of my voice to give it that sort of whole rounded feel that you would get on the radio and on other podcasts. So that would be one element to it, but I'd be interested to know if anyone can hear an accent in my voice as well as that. So please do let me know if you had heard that through the week. So the main reason why I wanted to record this podcast isn't because I wanted to spend the time speaking about all the different things that impact me, but I wanted to talk about the impact that things can have on people starting a business. And as the episode was titled, The Things That Hold Us Back, I wanted that to be the general gist of what I wanted to talk about this week, because I wanted it to be something that other people could take something away from. I didn't want this to just be me on here speaking for an hour about only something that impacts me. I wanted people to be able to sort of relate in a way to it and think about things that have held them back in the past, because I'm sure there have been several different things that have held all of you back from wanting to start something that you've been dreaming of starting for a long time, and whether that be justified or not. Most of the reasons that I hear from people aren't really justified. They just are overly scared of something, and that is okay to be scared about that. It's not always something that is in our control, but I would like to be able to hand my advice, I guess, and my thought process in that things that I've had to overcome, and try and help you guys in overcoming some of your own fears in starting any sort of creative endeavor, in the way of the things that you need to do and you need to be okay with in order to start those. And so for me, as I've said, my speech has been something that has held me back for the longest period of time. And it really did stop me from starting my business earlier, because of the fact that I didn't want to have to speak to anyone about my business. And I suppose in a way it's a good thing and a bad thing that I'm starting this business, because I always had in the back of my mind the alternative. And the alternative for me was to go and work in a job where I would probably be working with other people. And so that to me didn't sound great either, in the fact that I would have to work with other staff. So the idea to work on my own really sounds great until you think about the career that I've decided to head into photography, where most of the business is customer service. And so there is a lot of speaking that has to go on with other people. And I just can't do anything to get around that. So that has been something that it 100%, it did hold me back in the start. And it was one of the reasons why I decided to start in the journey that I did, and tried to start small and tried to not be in such a customer facing area of photography. I didn't want to have to work with other people. And I said that last week, and I said that was part of me being a little bit introverted and not wanting to work with other people, which is partly true. But it's also partly true that I was scared to have to speak to other people. And those two aren't always hand in hand. Those two exist on their own, I guess, because there are a fair few things that I do that aren't things that introverted people would normally do. And so it was more the fact that I didn't want to have to talk to other people in that way. And so I had to really work on myself in that way, because I had to come to a point where I was happy to talk to other people. And I'm going to speak about it a bit later on, but it was one of those things where I was really umming and ahhing whether I should continue into starting my business, because I knew that there would be so much communication that would have to take place verbally. And so that for me always scared me off and scared me into not wanting to do that profession, because I would have to speak to other people, and that isn't something that I ever look forward to. And that is something that for me is very anxiety provoking, especially speaking to people who I haven't actually met before. And so I have to sort of allow myself to be in the right headspace to be able to do that. And I think I've certainly come a long way with that over the past year. It's not something I ever thought that I would be comfortable having to do, but I think over the past year or so, I think I've learnt in myself that I am able to, and I am able to speak to other people in a way that I'm very comfortable with, and that I don't judge myself on the way that I speak to other people, and I don't get as scared anymore, especially when I am working for someone else. I don't find that as daunting anymore, because I know what the job is, and the job aspect of actually working with other people and trying to instruct other people on how to take photos and how to take good photos and how to pose for photos. I feel like I've started to get that sort of down pat, and that I know what I'm going to say and that I know my routine. So there's less anxiety around the whole aspect of actually taking the photos, which in turn allows me to be more comfortable when speaking to other people. But there's still definitely an aspect of the small talk between other people in between when I'm out taking photos or before and afterwards. And so that is still something that I struggle with, and still something that I still find strange, but I'm certainly learning, and I'm certainly not someone who is adverse to conversation. I find that I do quite enjoy conversation, and so that to me is not something that holds me back, and I don't think I lose actual things to talk about, and I don't think I'm bad to inherently talk to, but for some people, I feel like it can be a bit of a turn off, and it may be hard to actually hold a conversation with me, having to take so long to have a conversation with someone else, and having to take so long to actually speak and complete actual sentences. So that for me was something that was hard, but I think I had to get over the fact that other people actually cared as much as I thought they cared. And I think that is true in any aspect of anything, in that if you think that other people are so fixated on you, then that is a very selfish outlook in a way, because to think that you're the main priority in their life is a little bit crazy, to be honest, because most people are too concerned about themselves to even have any care in the world about you, and to think that their main concern is about how hard it is to have a conversation with you is probably untrue, and they know that they're there for the work and you're there for the work, and if you can do a good job, they're really not going to care one way or the other. And the majority of people that I've spoken to have actually been quite honest and quite open and quite comforting about the whole situation. They just sort of act as if it's not there and sort of just move on with the work we have to do. Because for me, like, drawing attention to it is something that is never anything that actually helps. So for me, that has been really good. But one of the things that I did have to come to terms with, and one of the things that I've been struggling with of late, is having to speak to people on the phone. And this for me has been something that I've struggled with for quite a while, because speaking to people on the phone is just as hard as having an in-person conversation, if not harder. And you would think that it would be easier because there's some sort of remove from actually being there with the person, but in that way it actually makes it harder because the person can't actually see what's actually happening, because the person can't actually see what's happening on the other end. So for them, it's quite strange, I guess, and they don't actually know what's happening when there is a big break in conversation between me trying to say words. So it often can be brought to the front in a conversation on the phone, as opposed to what I was just saying before, is that most people, when we're speaking in person, will normally just ignore it and normally act as if it's just normal. And I do quite appreciate that. But on the phone, it's hard for people to act as if it's normal, because they will assume that there's an issue on the phone. They'll assume that I've just hung up on them. They'll assume that I've just hung up on them, or that I've just dropped out of service or something like that. And so it's often brought up in that sort of way. And I know that there isn't anyone trying to be harmful about it, but it can often be hard in that sort of sense. But then also holding a conversation over the phone is very hard for me, and not something that I've ever tried to do. It's not something that I've ever liked to do. I'm always someone who will, if there isn't another way, I will always email someone or always message them or anything like that, because I think it's easier for me to get across the things that I'm trying to say. If I'm trying to outline something, especially about my business, on the phone can be very hard. And that sort of, I had an example of it this morning when someone wanted to ring me and ask me a few questions about some work they wanted me to do for them, and we were trying to go back and forth, on price, and they were trying to ring me to talk about the inclusions and the different things that had and the different things that would come along with a certain price. And for me, I found that very challenging, because I didn't want to have the conversation on the phone, because for me, it's never going to be one that is on any sort of equal playing field for me. And I can't actually bring myself to have a discussion on the phone about anything, because I'm never going to get my point across as equally as anyone else will. And so for me, it seems sort of one-sided, and I would much rather outline everything that I have to say in an email, because a lot of that material will actually get across and be probably more easily received. Because for most people, the main reason they would like to make a phone call is because they're after the information immediately, and they're not wanting to hang on for a response for the email, or they're unsure about something and they just want to clarify. And for me, answering the phone is probably not going to clarify them very much for them. I can try my best, but it's not going to clarify a lot for them. And so I've always been someone who would rather answer emails, but I know that in business I have to answer phones and have to be able to accept phone calls off clients, because if I don't, I'll be turning down so much work. And there are quite a lot of people who would prefer to just have a conversation on the phone, and so I can't ignore that aspect. And that has been one of the biggest things for me in recent times of having to think about those sort of things, and having to think about how I'm going to approach that, I guess, in terms of moving forward. And so I wanted to then touch on. I wanted to go back onto the podcast for a second and talk about why I actually started this podcast. Because overall, this was really for me to have a bit of a diary of things and have a bit of a journal, I guess, of the growth of my business and for me to be able to look back on in a year's time, and that is true. And hopefully in that process, it could help other people. And that has always been something that I have been strong about, because I don't think there are enough people out there who are open and transparent with enough of their business, especially people who are just starting out and people who are trying to actually make something of themselves and not hiding it all away. So I've been honest about that. But for me, one of the other big reasons, and one of the reasons why I wanted this to be episode number 10 of the podcast, is because I wanted it to actually use it as a platform to speak to people. And I wanted to improve my speaking skills and my conversational skills, because those have been things that I felt I've always struggled with. And so having this podcast was going to be something that I could actually talk to other people without having so much of a interruption, I guess, or having so much of a burden in the way of me having those conversations. And so this was a way that I was going to get some of my points across to other people that hadn't heard what I'd had to say before. So I was really glad to actually start this podcast, and that for me, I have actually seen a bit of a change in that, because I've been having conversation with other people and using some of the skills that I've been working on, as I said, through this podcast and through conversations that I've been having here with myself, and sort of using those in other people's conversations and when I'm talking to other people. And so I have actually found this podcast to be very, very beneficial, I guess, in a way, because without it, first off, it's helped me to categorize and document my thoughts in a way, I guess, because it's helped me to actually speak them out loud and hear them back in return. So that has been something that has been really helpful. But then also number two is that other people hearing me speak and hearing things about my life has then helped them in having conversation with me, but also helped me having conversations with them, because it hands them things to talk about, for one, but two, it allows me to draw upon some of the experiences that I've used and some of the skills that I've used recording this podcast and moving those into different conversational aspects of my life. And so, as I said, this has been something that has been holding me back for quite a few years now, and in all different aspects of things that it's been holding me back from. And I'm always trying to get ahead of myself and trying to get outside my own thoughts on thinking that this has to be something that does hold me back forever, because I don't think it needs to be, and it doesn't need to be such a big burden on my life, even though it is a really big part of my life for any of those people out there who do know me and do know how much of a struggle it is for me on a day-to-day. It's something that I've been working so hard at and working in my own head, because I'm not someone who thinks that everything is in my own head, but I'm someone who thinks that I can try to get through anything if I actually put my mind to it and don't let anything stand in my way. So I've been trying to just, always not let these things hold me back, and try to always to get out in front of them and try to make changes and make new things and start new things where I can, because I just think that is one of the most important ways to be able to prove to myself that I actually can do things. And as I said with this podcast, I'm now up to episode 10, and I really think I've proven to myself that I am able to record this podcast. It was definitely one of the things that I was unsure if I would be able to record a podcast at all. And I'm sure in the first few episodes were really bad, and they were a real struggle to get through, because I didn't know anything that I would be speaking about, but also it was so hard to actually have a conversation for an hour and have that speech continue to be smooth, I guess, and understandable for an hour. So that sort of came down to all the editing, as I said at the start, and the fact that you probably wouldn't have even realized that there was anything wrong with that first episode, apart from just having a few nerves there at the start. You probably wouldn't have even known that there was anything wrong with that. But I think now, moving into episode 10, I feel quite comfortable in trying to come and sit down here and record these episodes, because I've proven to myself now that I can actually record them. And so that has been such a big thing for me in proving that to myself, but also proving other things to myself, and proving that I can have a conversation with someone else, and I can actually start my own business and have a conversation with other clients and actually have a chat to them without it being such a big impact. Because at the start, it's all in your own head. It's all uncharted. It's all uncharted territory, I guess, in a way, because you don't know how it's going to play out and you don't know what the reception is going to be from other people. And most of the time, the things that you're thinking in your own head are always going to be worse than how it's actually going to unfold in the real world. And so you would be surprised by the amount of support and the amount of things that other people have said to me because of how they've enjoyed this podcast. And so I've just been so glad that I've actually had it out there in the world. And if I would have allowed my speech to hold me back and to actually not start this podcast, I think I would have had regrets over that. And I think I would have been holding on to it for so long, because it was something that I really wanted to start probably early last year or the year before. And so I'm glad that I did finally get around to it. There were a few things that I probably had to do in between, but I'm glad that I started this, and I'm glad that I started in my business when I did, because I'm glad that I have transitioned now into more work that is directly speaking with other people and working with actual clients and working in a very people-centered community, I guess, in moving into the wedding photography industry, in that I think I'm going to have to be speaking to people all day. But I don't feel as bad about that. I don't feel as nervous about that, because I feel like I've proven to myself over smaller periods of time and smaller occasions and smaller interactions with other people and people that I've worked with previously that I can hold a conversation and I can actually talk to people, and I've had confidence in my skills and I've started to get to a level where I'm okay. Now, I'm not going to try to deny the fact that on the first occasion when I had to go out and had to go take photos with other people who I had no idea who they were, and I'd only spoken to them over email, and we'd organised to go and meet up, that on those first occasions when I was first meeting people at the end of last year there, I guess, those were hard. And I'm not going to say that was easy. I'm not going to say that they weren't a very nerve-wracking experience, because they were. And it was all the unknown for me, that I just didn't know how I'd go. I didn't know what would happen. I had never done that before. I'd never done anything sort of to that standard, where it was already hard enough walking into a situation that I hadn't actually gone and taken any photos of people before. So that was hard enough, and having the expectation that I would actually be able to perform in the day and actually take the photos of people and having them actually pay me for my services was so nerve-wracking. And I've spoken about that on many other occasions. But then to have the fact that I don't know if I can hold a conversation with these people, and I don't know if I can speak to them and tell them what I want them to do, and how am I going to go trying to direct people and trying to get them in different poses and things like that. How is that going to go? How is that going to play out? If they can't hear me, if they can't understand what I'm trying to say, is that going to be something? But I think in the end, people are very understanding, and people know you're there to do a service. They're not concerned about how you are able to speak, I guess, in a way. They're probably not concerned about the clothes you wear. They're probably not concerned about your hairstyle. They're not concerned about they're not concerned about how much gear or how much equipment you have, which are all things that people concern themselves way too much with. They overthink about the things that they think other people are going to think of them. And at the end of the day, you've just got to put that into that. You got to put that into that category of things that people really aren't caring about, because they're too busy caring about themselves. And so that was one of the biggest things for me in the start, and it is one of the things that I think is going to continue me on moving forward, and that it's still going to be a nerve-wracking experience regardless when I turn up to take photos of my first wedding. But I know that I already have these skills in my bag, and that I can draw upon those and these ideologies, I guess, in the way that I know that other people aren't really concerned, and that I know I don't need to try and prove anything to anyone. I know I'm there to try to do the best job that I can, and I know that as long as I do the best job, I'll be happy, and I can walk away from that situation being very happy and very relieved that I've actually made it through. And I think it's all upwards from there, in that I know that I can actually perform on this in the day, but I don't care what other people think of me or how they think that I've portrayed myself, because because in the end, I'll just be very happy that I've actually been able to turn up and actually been able to get there and actually do the work and actually walk away from it and still have a smile on my face, because I'm just so happy for myself that I've been able to do this type of work. And I'm so thankful for what this type of work has allowed me to do. I've said it before, but I'm thankful for the fact that I have this podcast, and I'm thankful for anything on the internet that has allowed me to speak from my own heart and speak my own truth through the internet and through just being able to be at home and actually have things out in the world without having to interact with other people without that sounding too bad. Of course, I enjoy interacting with other people, but I think in the start, one of the biggest things was it was hard for me to put anything out there in the world. And so having it be a bit removed, and me being a bit removed from this whole situation, this whole me being in my office here at home, just speaking to a microphone, I'm extremely removed from anyone who is actually listening to this episode, but in a way that has allowed me to create so much great stuff, and has given me so much confidence moving forward in the fact that I know I can take good photos, I know I can produce great art, and those skills that I've gained through being at home and working on my own craft through that and through any sort of medium has really allowed me to move into the real world and take those skills and allow myself to be out of my own head enough that I can then actually make that jump into the real world and realize my own dreams in that way. So that is really all I wanted to say on today's episode, guys. I hope that you did enjoy this one. I hope it didn't drag out too long for you, and I didn't want that to be anything that would make anyone feel bad for me or feel any sort of sympathy for me, because that's not anything that I'm after at the end of the day. That's probably why I didn't go into so much detail, and anyone who knows me would know that I'm not after those sort of things. So I just want to inspire people that if I can be out here trying to do these things and trying to make my own business in an area that really does scare me and does every day scare me so much to think that anything could happen and that I could be in conversation with people and things could all go completely wrong and people could think I'm an absolute idiot on any day of the week. And that does scare me, but I'm out here still trying to make the best of it and trying to make something of myself. And if I can do that, you guys can as well. And as I said, I have so much empathy for anyone else who is going through something in their own life and going through struggles in their own head, because that to me is just so relatable and so understandable that you would need a bit more time and you would need to process those sorts of things. And you have to be able to come to a point, like I said, that you just stop almost caring in a way and just own the things that you have and just be able to put yourself out there, because I've had so much enjoyment and so much satisfaction out of just putting myself out there, because I was eating myself up in my own head for so long that I'm so glad that it's out there now. And so I hope this week's episode can inspire you guys in trying to just put yourself out there a bit more and trying to overcome those fears by exposure, I guess, in a way, and try to throw yourself in the deep end a bit and show yourself that it can actually be done and prove to yourself that it can be done, because once you do that, it's so much easier from there. Once you've shown yourself that you can actually do something, then everything else is then in your head, because you know you can actually do it and you're the only one holding yourself back from there on. So I hope you guys did enjoy this week's episode, guys. If you did, I'd love it if you could share this episode around with someone else who you think might enjoy this one. I know this was a bit more of a personal one for me, but it's not something that I usually tend to speak on. I don't like to speak about my own life as much as this, but as I said, I was so proud to actually make it to 10 episodes this week, and I hope that you guys are enjoying the podcast, and I'm so excited to see where we continue to go from here. I know I didn't speak a lot about what has happened in my life this week, because I wanted to sort of leave that out and sort of start back on that again next week. And I have had a lot actually happening in the back end in my own business, and I'm very excited to speak all about that next week. But I just wanted to give myself time to breathe in this week's episode and time to speak on something that I thought was important and something that I thought was very worthy of actually making an episode about. So I hope you guys did enjoy this one and you do actually get something out of it. And if you did, I would love to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear what you actually thought of this episode. And I'd love to hear about some of the things that you've overcome in your own life, and that some of the things that have been holding you back, and things you've done to overcome those, because I don't think that because I always think there's more that all of us can learn. And so I'd love to hear some of those things, and hopefully then I can share them on the podcast if you would like. Anyway, guys, I will speak to you again next Monday. Bye.